welcome to another book review on this channel. Today we'll be discussing Shields of Pride by Elizabeth Chadwick. Now this was published in 1994 and is more historical romance than historical fiction, which is what the author's known for more nowadays. But this is one of her earlier novels, and if you're looking to get into historical fiction, this is not a bad step to take. Now the book begins in the summer of 1173. Where in England there was a great rebellion kicking off. The king at the time was King Henry II. He was rebelled against by his eldest son, the young King Henry, which part of the reason is because he had him crowned in his lifetime so as not to have to fight for the crown as Henry II had to do. So this rebellion was kicked off by young King Henry, his brothers Geoffrey and Richard, who went on to be Richard II, and their mother and King Henry's wife, Queen Eleanor of Aquitaine. Now this war was really significant. It was coming on the back of the rebellion from King Henry II's mother, Empress Matilda, going against her cousin, King Stephen, because Empress Matilda was the only surviving daughter and child of King Henry I, and Stephen was her cousin who took the throne while she was out of the country with her husband, Geoffrey of Anjou. It's a really complicated history, but really, really interesting, and it's about high time that they made a series on that instead of going over the Tudors again. Because the Plantagenets, especially in the early history, were cutthroats, blackmailers, just the whole history is just wonderful to research, and I highly recommend you doing that if you have an interest. But this rebellion and war lasted about 18 months, but many castles, towns, villages were burned. Thousands of people were killed because really, who cares about the lives of a few peasants when you're out for the throne? And this is the backdrop of Shields of Pride. And let me just read the blurb for you right now. Joscelin de Gaulle, the beloved bastard son of William Ironheart, is a man deeply scarred by past tragedy. Unable to inherit his father's title and constantly at odds with his half-brothers Ragnar and Ivor, Joscelin has made his way as a mercenary and is now in service of the crown. Strife is threatened in 12th century England, for Henry II's own sons have rebelled and disaffected barons and knights are flocking to their banner. When Joscelin meets the Lady Linnet de Montsorel, neither has any inkling that they will soon be man and wife, nor that their relationship will be marred by revelations of past loves and family secrets. Then Ragnar and Ivor plot to overthrow their own father. Matters come to a head in Nottingham where William is seriously wounded. Linnet and Joscelin bring him home to find themselves embroiled in a struggle where death is the only victor. Now if that sounds something that you would be interested in, I highly recommend you reading this, but let's get a bit more into it, shall we? I will try not to have any spoilers for you. And if I do end up mentioning any spoilers, in editing I'll put a spoiler card up. Now in the very first chapter we are introduced to Joscelin de Gaulle, our main male character, Giles de Montsorel and his wife Linnet. And this happens in the manner of a wain being broke in the middle of a road that Joscelin is trying to get down with his troop. They end up being in the middle of a downpour and we get some scattered history of the three main characters. Joscelin is a bastard son, he is a mercenary who has risen high in rank in service to the chief justiciar of England, Richard de Lucy, and if you are fond of history, I would recommend looking that one up. He was left in charge of the country while King Henry was across the narrow sea, which is the Channel to all intents and purposes, fighting his sons in Normandy. Now, like I said, Joscelin is the bastard son of William Ironheart, and Ironheart is a nickname which he earned in going mad with grief over the death of Joscelin's mother, Morwenna, and he tried to run himself through with his own sword, but the sword broke, and thus he got the name Ironheart. Now Linnet herself, she, like many other medieval women of the time, was in a very unhappy, abusive marriage with Giles. Giles was one of her brother's friends, her brother is now dead, and he married his sister off to this friend when she was just 13, and they've been married ever since. And Giles is not the best husband. He's not even a really good character. He's just an awful human being. But like it said in the blurb, Joscelin and Linnet marry. And in order to do that, Giles has to die. And die he does. All his own fault. But I will let you read it. No spoilers allowed after all. Now, Joscelin's home life is far from ideal. You would think that being a bastard born in medieval England, it wasn't that great to start with, but this one is even worse. And the majority of this fault lies with his father, William. Now, William de Rocher is married this 30 years to his wife, Agnes, not Morwenna. And together they have a horde of daughters, but they never get mentioned, and 3 sons, being Ragnar, Ivar, and Martin. Now, William is a soldier and campaigner, battle-hardened through and through, and on one of these campaigns, when he came home, before his children were born, he brought with him to his house, back home to his loving wife at the time, Morwenna, his mistress, and he adored her. Now, keeping a wife and a mistress together under the same roof would be like transporting nitro at the best of times. But in medieval England, there was nothing really the wife could do about it, and it was improper, but if the man didn't care, then you're kind of stuck with what you've got. And that's where Agnes found herself. Because Morwenna was adored, and as such, she was treated as the lady of the house by William, who was the man of the house, and everybody acquiesced to whatever he said. And Agnes was sort of pushed to the side, and properly insulted. And to add insult to injury, Morwenna and Agnes were pregnant at around the same time, and Morwenna gave birth first. So she gave William his first son, which was Joscelin, and Agnes gave birth to what then was his first legitimate son, which was Ragnar, but that paled in comparison to Morwenna getting there first. But not only did the children have to grow up in this far from ideal environment for 5 years until Morwenna's death, William was abusive, and not all physical, most of it was mental, and the mental abuse of ignoring his wife and bullying his children. Joscelin was his favourite son, even though he was a bastard born and couldn't and would never be able to inherit any of the estate, any of the titles, anything that William had won. But if he could have done, he would have disowned his own children and given it all to Joscelin. A fact that his wife Agnes and his sons knew very well, very early on. So it didn't exactly create a good home life. Now, mirrored to this, we get Lynette's backstory in the first few pages of this and her marriage to Giles de Mozzarella. Giles is abusive, jealous, insecure, and of course the men of the time encouraged this behaviour because there was nothing wrong with keeping your wife in her place. Now, the only thing that tethers Linnet to her life, and in order to push through the abuse that she suffers practically daily, is her only child, Robert. Giles is only heir, and you would think that that would stop him from being abusive, being this his only son, his only heir, and there doesn't look to be like any other forthcoming, but that does not stay his hand from being abusive to his child. Now, I really liked reading this book, although, as I said earlier, you can tell that it is one of the author's more earlier works. It lacks the depth and the full historical scope which can be found in her later novels, such as The Greatest Night and A Place Beyond Courage. I've got them all on a shelf back there. I have read it before. I have read it quite a few times, this being... I lost track, but it's an easy read. I really liked it. Now, history in this, if you're looking for an historical read, then this is not it. If you like historical romance, then this is very much it. Because the historical events, the rebellion going on between King Henry II and his sons, it is more of a backdrop around the romance than an actual bone of contention in this book, as you would find with most historical fiction. But that being said, it doesn't do detriment to it to have the romance front and foremost, because it isn't all romantic. It just delves into the tumultuous, troubled, abusive life that both Joscelin and Linnet and everyone around them have been forced to endure, and how they would come over that, and what happens when it goes too far. Now, the characters, not just the main two, all the characters are written really well. They have a lot of flaws and acknowledge most of them, and some of them they just don't acknowledge at all. And one of the things I liked about this is that Chadwick doesn't shy away from the descriptions of domestic abuse, whether that being mental, physical, the darker, grittier aspects of it. It delves into the effect that this has, or those scenarios have, on the children that have to grow up in an environment like that, and what ramifications it can have further down the line if it isn't stopped. Our main character Joscelin openly states more than once that he would never ever treat his children the way that his father treated all of them, and him being his favourite son, he got less of it than the others, and he still knows that he would never want a family like that. Now, as you can probably tell by its size, this is more novella than novel, and the lack of length shows in the story. And you might think that this is like really quite a long one. It isn't, because unknowingly when I bought this, it's actually got large text. It's actually got large text on it. So it's really easy to read. This one could have delved a lot more into what was happening at the time, as some of her more recent books do, and could have dived more into scenarios that are teased but never realised. For example, there's a mention of something that happens in Linnet's past to make her the way she is, and it gets mentioned quite a few times through this book. It's a thread of contention, and yet we get what happens for the outcome of what happens for these events, but we never get the road that leads to that outcome. From the event happening to the outcome, we don't get that bit in the middle, and it lacks because of that. I think if Elizabeth Chadwick rewrote this now, it would not be the same bare minimum that we get in here. I think it would be more hard-hitting, and I think it would have a hell of a lot more depth. So for me, this book gets 3.5 stars, and I do enjoy reading it. It just wasn't enough for 4. I do like the characters, I like how flawed they all are, and although, yeah, the plot is quite predictable, especially it being a romance and not historical fiction, but it's nice to read. So I would recommend picking it up if you want to have a quick read on a rainy afternoon. So let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section down below. Do not forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more videos. And let me know down below if you've read any historical fiction, what kind of timelines that you like to read. Do you like medieval? Do you like it more Tudor, more modern? Let me know, and as always, keep reading.